Clay Mercer slashed the rotten rope with his knife. Mud soaked his boots. 2 fingers missing on his left hand. A winter raid that never left his bones. The horse collapsed in the dust. Ribs showing. Eyes dull. Left beside the trail like broken gear. Then a girl's voice cut the wind. "Don't let him die, Mr. Clay." He turned. Lily Whitlock stood there. Barefoot. Holding the horse's torn brand rope. Riders appeared on the ridge behind her. Men who believed that horse should stay dead. Clay Mercer felt the old war wake in his chest. Because saving that horse was about to change his life forever. Before we ride deeper into the story, hit subscribe, ring the bell, so you'll never miss another ride through the legends of the Wild West. Now, let's get back to the trail. Clay Mercer pulled the knife free. The rope dropped in the mud. The horse sagged where it stood. Bones sharp under the hide. Breath thin. Clay caught the animal's halter before it folded completely. Easy now. His right hand worked steady. His left hand, missing 2 fingers, gripped what it could. The old ache crawled up his arm. Cold memory. Gunfire in winter. He shoved the thought away. "Don't let him die, Mr. Clay." The voice came small. But it cut the wind clean. Clay turned. A girl stood 10 paces back beside the broken fence line. Barefoot in the thawing mud. Hair tangled from the road. Dressed too thin for the season. Lily Whitlock. He knew the name. Everyone in Dry Creek knew it. The Whitlock Ranch had burned the winter before. Lily held the frayed end of the rope the horse had been tied with. Her knuckles were white around it. Clay studied her. Then the ridge behind her. The prairie rolled quiet under gray sky. But the quiet felt wrong. "You alone?" Clay asked. Lily nodded once. The horse wheezed beside him. Clay ran his hand down the animal's neck. Hot skin. Fever. Left here to die slow. He hated that kind of work. Hated men who did it. Clay started leading the horse toward the trail. "Come on," he muttered to the animal. Lily stepped after him without asking. Clay stopped. Boots sinking in thawed earth. "You go back to town," he said. "Dry Creek's east." Lily shook her head. "They'll find me there." Clay watched her a moment longer. Wind stirred the prairie grass. The horse stumbled again. Clay cursed under his breath and pulled harder. They reached the ranch gate near dusk. The place looked the same as always. Lonely. 1 cabin. 1 barn leaning against the wind. Fence rails patched 3 times over. Clay pushed the gate open. The horse staggered inside. Lily followed. Clay turned on her. "You can't stay." She didn't answer. Instead she stepped toward the horse. Small hands steady. She brushed mud from the animal's eye. "His breathing's bad," she said quietly. Clay frowned. "You know horses?" "My father did." Silence hung between them. Then the sound came. Distant. Hoofbeats. Clay's head lifted. He walked to the fence line. 3 riders moved slow along the far ridge. Watching the valley. Watching this ranch. Clay felt the old weight settle in his chest. Trouble. He looked back at the girl. At the dying horse inside his gate. At the riders who believed that horse should already be dead. Clay Mercer closed the ranch gate with a hard wooden crack. Because trouble had just ridden straight into his quiet life. Night settled over Clay Mercer's ranch, slow and gray. The barn lantern burned low. Wind pressed against the boards. Inside, the horse lay on a bed of old hay Clay dragged together with a pitchfork. Its ribs rose and fell shallow. Each breath a fight. Clay knelt beside the animal with a bucket of warm water. Steam drifted into the cold air. He dipped a rag and worked mud from the horse's neck. Careful. Quiet. Lily Whitlock stood nearby. Watching. She had not spoken in several minutes. Clay noticed that. Most folks filled silence. This girl let it breathe. "You can sleep in the loft," Clay said at last. His voice rough from disuse. Lily didn't move. Her eyes stayed on the horse. "It was tied to die," she said softly. Clay nodded once. Men did that when they wanted something gone but didn't want blood on their hands. Leave it to thirst. Or wolves. Lily crouched beside the horse. She brushed a clump of dirt from its eye. "His name?" she asked. Clay shrugged. "Don't know." The horse shivered. Clay set the rag down and reached for the lantern. He lifted it closer. Light spilled across the animal's neck. Across the scarred hide. And the brand. Burned deep. Old. But something about it pulled at Clay's memory. He frowned. Then Lily noticed something else. "Wait." She leaned closer. Her fingers pushed aside a crust of dried blood near the shoulder. "Another mark," she whispered. Clay's jaw tightened. He bent low. There it was. Faint. Half hidden beneath the first brand. A second symbol. Burned over. Covered. Clay leaned back slowly. "That ain't right." Lily looked at him. "Why would someone burn a second brand?" Clay didn't answer. Because the answer was simple. And ugly. The barn door rattled suddenly in the wind. Clay rose and walked to it. He opened it just enough to see the ridge. Dark now. But lantern light flickered far off. 3 riders. Still there. Still watching. Clay shut the door again. Hard. Inside, Lily had found a blanket. She folded it under the horse's neck. Gentle. Careful. Clay watched her work. Small hands. Steady. "You been around animals before?" he asked. "My father raised cattle." She said it like it hurt. Clay nodded. He knew the tone. The tone of someone whose past burned down behind them. He moved to the stall wall and grabbed a jar of salve. Old medicine. Strong smell. He knelt beside the horse again and began working the ointment into a deep rope burn. His left hand slipped. 2 fingers gone. The grip never quite right. The jar dropped. Clay caught it against the straw with his boot. But Lily had seen. Her eyes moved to his hand. Not curious. Not afraid. Just seeing. "What happened?" she asked quietly. Clay didn't answer. The lantern flame shifted in the draft. Shadows moved across the barn beams. For a long moment the only sound was the horse breathing. Then Clay spoke. "Winter raid." 2 words. Nothing more. He rubbed the salve deeper into the wound. Harder than needed. Lily waited. Clay rarely talked. But sometimes silence pushed things loose. "They came before dawn," he said. 8 riders. His voice stayed flat. Like reading weather off the sky. "They burned the south pasture first." He wiped his hands on a rag. "Shot my brother when he ran for the well." Lily didn't move. Didn't speak. Clay stared at the straw. Horse spooked in the smoke. His jaw tightened. "Dragged my hand through the gate chain." He lifted the scarred hand slightly. The missing fingers told the rest. Lily's gaze didn't change. No pity. Just understanding. "I'm sorry," she said. Clay shook his head. "Don't be." He stood. Walked to the water bucket. Poured more warm water. Behind him the horse shifted. Weak. But alive. Lily placed her palm against its neck. "It stayed alive," she said. Clay glanced back. "What?" "The horse." She looked at him. "So did you?" Clay didn't answer that. Instead he walked back to the stall. Checked the animal's breathing again. Stronger now. Barely. But stronger. Outside the wind carried something new. Distant voices. Clay froze. Bootsteps crossed the barn floor, slow and careful. He moved to the side door. Opened it a crack. Far out near the creek crossing. Lanterns moved. More than 3 now. 5 riders. Maybe 6. Searching. Clay shut the door again. The latch clicked. Lily looked up. "They're coming back," she said. Clay nodded once. "Maybe." He grabbed a saddle blanket and threw it over the stall rail. Then he moved to the lantern and lowered the wick. The barn dimmed. Only a soft orange glow left. "Best keep quiet tonight," Clay said. Lily nodded. She settled against the stall wall beside the horse. Not afraid. Just waiting. Clay stood in the shadows near the barn door, watching the cracks of moonlight between the boards. Listening to the prairie. Listening for hoofbeats. Because whoever had tried to erase that horse once would likely come back to finish the job. Morning came gray and cold. Clay Mercer stepped onto the porch with a tin cup of coffee. Frost clung to the fence rails. The valley lay quiet. Too quiet. He stood there a long moment listening. No hoofbeats. No voices. Only the wind moving across the grass. Behind him the cabin door creaked open. Lily Whitlock stepped outside. She had washed her face. Her hair tied back with a strip of cloth. Clay noticed something else. His old coat hung on her shoulders. Too big. But warmer than the thin dress she arrived in. She nodded toward the barn. He lived through the night. Clay grunted once. He already knew. The horse had stamped once before dawn. Weak. But alive. Clay finished the coffee and set the cup down. "Come on." They walked across the yard. Bootsteps in frost. Bare feet inside borrowed boots Lily had found by the door. Inside the barn the lantern still glowed faint. The horse stood now. Legs shaky. But standing. Clay moved slow toward the stall. The animal lifted its head. Ears twitching. Clay rested a hand against its neck. Warm. Still fevered. But fighting. "That's something," he muttered. Lily slipped past him and checked the water bucket. Empty. She carried it to the pump outside without asking. Clay watched her go. Then he noticed something near the barn door. Tracks. Boot prints. Fresh. They circled the yard. Stopped near the fence. Then turned back toward the ridge. Clay's jaw tightened. Someone had come close in the night. Watching. Measuring. He kicked dirt over the tracks. Lily returned with the bucket sloshing full. She saw his expression. "What is it?" Clay nodded toward the ground. "Visitors." Her shoulders stiffened. "They didn't come in?" "Not yet." Clay lifted the feed sack from a peg and poured a small pile of grain into a pan. The horse stepped forward slowly. Hungry. But cautious. Lily watched the animal eat. "You're good with him," Clay said. She shrugged. "He's scared." Clay snorted. "Ain't the only one." Silence returned. The kind that sits between strangers. Clay leaned against the stall rail. Finally he spoke. "You can't stay here long." Lily didn't argue. She already knew. "My aunt lives in Dry Creek," she said. 2 days' ride. Clay nodded. The town sat east beyond the creek valley. Safe enough. Maybe. "When the roads thaw," he said. "You'll go there." Lily studied the horse. "And him?" Clay looked at the brand again. The burned mark half hidden beneath the first. Trouble stamped into flesh. "He'll travel when he can walk," Clay said. Another pause. Wind rattled the loose barn boards. Then Lily spoke again. "What if they come back before that?" Clay didn't answer right away. Instead he grabbed a brush from the wall. Started working mud from the horse's coat. Slow strokes. Careful. Finally he said it. "Then we deal with it." Lily watched the missing fingers of his left hand struggle around the brush handle. "You can't fight 6 riders alone," she said quietly. Clay kept brushing. "I've fought worse," she believed him. That was the strange part. The way the man said things. Flat. Like weather. After a while Clay stopped brushing. He set the brush down and faced her. "Until the spring thaw," he said. "You stay." Lily blinked. Clay pointed toward the stall. "You help with him." Then toward the fence outside. "And the chores." She waited. Clay added the last part. "When the road's clear, you ride east." The words hung between them. A simple bargain. Time measured in melting snow. Lily nodded slowly. "A month maybe." "Maybe." The horse lifted its head. For the first time its eyes looked clearer. Alive. Lily smiled faintly. Clay noticed. Didn't say anything. But the barn felt different suddenly. Less empty. Outside the wind carried a distant sound. Metal striking metal. Faint. From the direction of the creek road. Clay stepped to the open barn door. Across the valley a wagon moved along the ridge trail. 2 men riding beside it. Clay's eyes narrowed. He knew that wagon. Everyone in the valley did. Black iron wheels. High sideboards. Walter Briggs supply wagon. The kind that never traveled without reason. Clay closed the barn door slow. The latch clicked. Lily looked up. "Who is it?" Clay didn't answer right away. He stared at the horse. At the hidden brand beneath the first burn. Then he spoke. "Trouble with money behind it." Outside the wagon rolled slowly closer to the valley. And the month Clay Mercer had just promised suddenly felt much shorter. The next morning broke with wind and pale sunlight. Thin gold over frost. Clay Mercer stood at the fence line with a hammer in his good hand and nails in his mouth. One rail had split in the night. Another sagged low where winter had twisted the post. He worked in silence. Leather gloves dark with age. Shoulders broad under the worn coat. Every strike of the hammer sharp in the cold air. Behind him came the scrape of a bucket. Lily Whitlock crossed the yard carrying water from the pump. Slow. Steady. The bucket looked too large for her arms. But she did not spill much. Clay glanced once. Said nothing. She passed him and kept going to the barn. That was how the days began now. No speeches. No questions. Just work. Inside the barn the horse lifted its head when Lily entered. Its coat had lost some of the dullness. The eyes tracked her. The pan of grain stood empty. She smiled a little and set down the water. Clay came in a minute later with hay over one shoulder. The smell of it warmed the dim stall. Dust in the morning light. He spread the hay. Checked the rope burn. Ran his hand down the horse's neck. Less heat now. Less trembling. Lily had already cleaned the bucket and laid out the brush and rag. Ready before he asked. Clay noticed. He always noticed useful things. "You ate?" he asked. Lily nodded. A lie. Clay could hear it in the way she said yes too quick. He walked out without another word. Returned a minute later with half a biscuit wrapped in cloth. Set it on the rail. Then he turned back to the horse as if the biscuit had placed itself there. Lily took it quietly. The barn stayed still except for brushing sounds. Slow strokes over hide. The horse leaned into it. Clay watched that. Animals knew the truth of hands. By midday the yard had changed. Split wood stacked by the porch. Blankets aired on the fence. Ashes cleaned from the hearth. Lily moves through the cabin like someone mending a place without being told. Not taking over. Just filling what had been empty too long. Clay came in from the shed and stopped at the doorway. The cabin smelled different. Coffee. Soap. Stew starting in the pot. Not rich. But warm. He set down the toolbox and stood there longer than needed. Lily looked up from peeling potatoes with his old knife. "I found onions hanging in the pantry." Clay grunted. "They were going soft. I cut the bad parts away." Another grunt. He crossed to the stove. Lifted the lid. Steam touched his face. For a second something moved through him. Not grief. Not peace either. Something between. A memory of home before it turned quiet. He put the lid back down. Outside, a crow caught hard from the fence. Clay's head turned at once. He stepped back onto the porch. Far off at the creek crossing stood two riders, small against the land, still as fence posts, watching the ranch. Clay narrowed his eyes. By the time Lily stepped out beside him, the riders had started away. "Same men?" she asked. "Maybe. They keep looking." Clay nodded. "Means they ain't found what they want." He went to the chopping block and brought the axe down on a log. Hard. Wood split clean. Again. Again. Lily understood the rhythm now. When Clay worried, he worked louder. That afternoon clouds rolled in from the west. Gray bellies dragging low. Wind pushed cold through the yard. Clay moved fast. Covered the feed. Latched the hen coop. Checked the barn roof over the south side where the boards lifted in a storm. Lily followed with twine and nails tucked into her apron. Before he asked, she held up the nails. Before he climbed, she steadied the ladder. Rain began as a mist. Then sharpened. Clay stood on the roof with the hammer clenched in his left hand, awkward and stubborn, missing fingers fighting the grip. The wind shoved at him. A board kicked loose. Lily saw it first. Clay. He looked down. Not at the board. At her face. She pointed. He caught the shift just in time and dropped to one knee as the plank lifted under his boot. The hammer slid. He snatched it against his chest and stayed there, breathing hard. Rain ran off the brim of his hat. For 1 second the whole world held still. Then he climbed down. Boots hitting mud heavy. Lily stepped back, expecting anger maybe. Clay only took the nails from her hand. "You see everything?" he asked. She shrugged. "Most things." He gave one short nod. That was close to praise from him. By evening the storm passed. The cabin glowed amber through the dark. Stew simmered low. Wet coats hung by the door. The horse stamped once in the barn, stronger now, impatient with the stall. Clay sat at the table sharpening a blade. Lily mended a torn saddle blanket near the fire. No one spoke for a long while. But the silence had changed. It no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like people sharing weather. Then came the sound. Not loud. A wagon rolling the far road. Metal rim against stone. Clay set down the blade and stood. Crossed to the window. In the moonlit dark, lanterns moved past the ridge. One wagon. Two riders. Heading toward Briggs' land. Lily watched him from the firelight. Trouble again? Clay kept his eyes on the night. Trouble don't stop just because supper's warm. He pulled the curtain half closed. Turned back to the room. To the fire. To the girl sewing by it. To the place that had begun, against his better judgment, to feel less like a hideout and more like a home worth losing. Morning came hard. No birdsong. No easy light. Just low clouds pressing over the valley and a damp wind that smelled of thawed earth and trouble. Clay Mercer stood in the yard splitting kindling. Each swing clean. Each strike harder than needed. The horse had grown stronger enough to stamp and pull at the stall rope. Lily Whitlock had laughed at that before sunrise. A small sound. Quick. Gone fast. But it had stayed with Clay all morning like warmth left in iron. Then he saw the dust. South Road. One wagon. Three riders. Coming straight for his gate. Clay set the axe head into the chopping block and wiped his palm on his trousers. The old ache in his left hand woke first. That was how trouble always announced itself now. Through scars. Lily stepped out of the barn with an armful of hay. She saw his face. Set the hay down slow. Who? Clay didn't answer. He was already walking to the gate. By the time the wagon rolled up, he knew the team. Black harness. Brass studs. Fine leather cared for by hands that never did any real labor. Walter Briggs sat high on the wagon bench in a dark coat too rich for mud season. Beside him rode Deputy Harlan Pike. Broad chest. Soft mouth. The kind of man who borrowed his courage from a badge. Another rider held back near the road. One of Briggs' ranch hands. Young. Watchful. Walter Briggs smiled before the wheels even stopped. It was not a friendly thing. It was the smile of a man used to being agreed with. "Mercer," he said. His voice carried smooth and dry. "Still breathing out here?" Clay rested one forearm across the gate. Said nothing. Briggs let his eyes drift over the ranch. The patched fence. The weathered barn. The cabin smoke rising steady. His smile sharpened. Small place to hide anything valuable. Lily had come to the porch by then. She stood still. Hands at her sides. Briggs saw her. Saw the barn behind her. Saw more than he said. "There's business to discuss," he went on. Deputy Pike pulled a folded paper from inside his coat. "The county has concerns," Pike said. He sounded official. Proud of it. About unpaid land taxes. Boundary questions. Use of disputed grazing ground. Clay looked at the paper. Did not take it. "That ground ain't disputed." Briggs chuckled. "Everything's disputed when records go missing." The words sat there. Calm. Ugly. Clay felt Lily's eyes shift from the porch to him. Watching. Learning. He opened the gate at last. Not wide. Just enough to step through. He took the paper from Pike and glanced over it. A tax notice. A survey challenge. County seal pressed at the bottom. Fresh ink. Fresh lies. Briggs leaned down a little from the wagon bench. "Would be a shame," he said, "for a man with one hand half ruined to lose the rest of what he owns over paperwork." Clay folded the paper once. Twice. Slow. His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. "You come a long way to count my fence posts." Briggs' smile faded some. "Maybe I came for a horse." The wind shifted. Cold across the yard. Lily did not move. Neither did Clay. Deputy Pike cleared his throat. "There's also word," he said, "of stolen stock moving through this valley. Branded animals. Altered markings. Worth investigating." Clay glanced toward the barn. Just once. But Briggs caught it. Of course he did. Men like Walter Briggs lived off small tells. The ranch hand near the road straightened in the saddle. Ready. Clay saw that too. He handed the folded paper back to Pike. "Then investigate the right ranch." Briggs laughed once. Soft. Almost bored. "I always do." The wagon rolled off after that. Not fast. Not in defeat. Just slow enough to leave the thread hanging in the mud behind it. Clay watched until the dust faded. Then he turned. Lily was already crossing the yard toward him. "What did he mean?" she asked. Clay held out his hand. She took the paper. "Read slowly." Her mouth tightened as she reached the seal. "He's trying to force you out." Clay nodded. "With law first." Lily looked toward the road where Briggs had gone. "And if that fails?" Clay looked at the barn. At the fresh boards on the roof. At the wood stacked by the porch. At the thin life they had built in a few short days. "He'll try something dirtier." That afternoon the pressure spread the way smoke does. Not all at once. Just enough to sting the eyes. Clay rode into Dry Creek for flour and nails. Lily stayed behind with strict instructions to keep the doors barred and the horse out of sight. Town felt wrong the minute he entered it. Conversations cut off when he passed. Men on the boardwalk looked away too quickly. At the mercantile, Mrs. Givens measured sugar without her usual small talk. At the blacksmith, old Tom Hanley spoke low while turning a horseshoe in the coals. "Heard Briggs filed on your south boundary," Tom muttered. "Clay paid for the nails." "Fast work." Tom snorted. "Fast money." Outside the sheriff's office, two ranchers stood reading a notice posted to the wall. Clay did not need to step closer to know whose name sat on it. His. Tax delinquency review. Land hearing in 5 days. He stood there in the wind reading it anyway. Every word a nail driven by a clean hand. No shouting. No gunfire. Just paper. Paper that could strip a man as bare as fire. When he got back near dusk, the ranch was too quiet. No kettle sound from the cabin. No movement by the barn. Clay swung down before the horse fully stopped. He crossed the yard fast. Hand near the revolver. The cabin door stood shut. Latched. Good. But nailed to it was a dead crow. Wings spread. Black against weathered wood. A strip of leather tied around its neck. Cut from a horse halter. Lily opened the door before he could stop her. Her face went pale at the sight. She had not cried since he knew her. She did not cry now. But her hand found the door frame to steady itself. Clay pulled the crow free. Threw it into the mud. Then he saw the second message. Branded into the leather strip with a hot iron. A single letter. B. Walter Briggs had stopped knocking. Now he was laying claim. And for the first time in years, Clay Mercer felt something rise stronger than grief. Not fear. Protection. Clay Mercer did not sleep much that night. The dead crow was gone from the yard. Burned in the stove. But the mark of it stayed. In the silence. In the way Lily checked the door latch twice before sitting by the fire. In the way Clay kept the rifle across his knees while the coffee boiled black and bitter. Wind moved soft around the cabin corners. Not a storm. Not yet. Just the kind of night that made a man listen harder than he breathed. By dawn the sky had cleared. Pale blue. Sharp cold. Clay stepped out to the porch and studied the ridge. Nothing moved. No riders. No dust. That bothered him more. Trouble that hides behind quiet usually comes with a plan. He crossed the yard to the barn. The horse stood waiting near the stall gate. Stronger now. Not healed. But alive enough to toss its head when Clay came near. Lily was already there with a brush and a pail of warm water. She had tied her hair back again. Wore the same boots that slipped a little at the heel. Clay lifted the lantern higher and looked once more at the burn marks on the horse's shoulder. The top brand was clear enough. AB laid over a crooked bar. Briggs' mark. Fresh by comparison. Cruel. Too dark. Too eager. Beneath it, though, half lost under scar tissue and cinched hair, the older mark sat fainter. A circle. A slash through it. And something else. Something that burn had almost eaten. Clay narrowed his eyes. Lily dipped the rag in water and passed it to him without being asked. He scrubbed the shoulder gentler this time. Mud loosened. Dried blood lifted away. The older mark showed more. "Hold the lantern closer," he said. Lily did. Light pooled gold over the horse's hide. There. A tiny shape at the edge of the circle. Like a crooked spur. Clay sat back on his heels. He knew that mark. Had seen it years ago at cattle auctions south of Dry Creek. Not on Briggs' stock. Never on his. Lily watched his face. "You know it." Clay nodded once. "Belongs to the Bellamy spread." "The ranch by the river?" He looked at her. "You know it?" "My father traded hay there one summer." Clay turned back to the brand. The Bellamy spread had once been the strongest ranch in the county after Briggs. Then old Ezra Bellamy died. His sons sold half the herd. The rest disappeared in a bad winter, or so folks were told. Briggs had bought grazing land cheap not long after. Clay stood slowly. The pieces began moving together in his mind. Not quick, but hard. Like ice breaking loose in a thaw. Lily looked from the horse to him. He stole it. Clay's jaw flexed. Maybe more than one. Outside, the barn doors gave a soft thud in the wind. Both of them turned. Clay listened. Nothing. He moved to the gap and checked the yard. Empty. But his hand stayed on the revolver a moment before he came back. Lily had crouched again beside the horse. Her small fingers followed the edges of the older brand. Then she stopped. There's something under the mane. Clay came closer. She parted the coarse hair near the base of the neck. A thin strip of leather had been braided into the mane so tightly it vanished unless a person knew to look. Clay cut it free with his knife. The leather was stiff with sweat and age. Wrapped around a tiny object no bigger than a walnut. Lily held out her hand. Clay set it there. Together they unwound the strip. Inside sat a brass tag. Bent. Blackened. But stamped. Bellamy River Stock Association. And beneath that, a number. 12. Lily looked up first. They tracked their horses. Clay nodded. Some ranchers did. He turned the tag over. On the back was another stamp. Not a mark this time. A date. April 17th. 5 years earlier. The year Bellamy stock vanished. Clay stared at the little tag until his fingers tightened around it. Briggs had not found one horse and claimed it. He had covered another man's brand. Covered the association tag. And if one horse carried proof, others might have too. Lily rose slowly. That means he lied to the county. To everyone. Clay slipped the tag into his pocket. It means he built part of his herd on theft. That afternoon they rode to the far pasture where Clay kept a line shack near the creek bend. He wanted distance from the ranch. Time to think. Lily rode the mule. Clay led the recovering horse on a long rope beside him, letting it feel the open ground again. The air smelled of wet grass and cedar. Birdsong returned in pieces. For half an hour it almost felt like a day without menace. Then they reached the creek crossing. Clay dismounted first. There in the mud along the water's edge he found tracks. Fresh. Wagon wheels. 2 saddle horses. One horse had dragged something heavy near the bank. He crouched and touched the mark. Still soft. Made this morning. Lily had gone quiet behind him. When he looked up, she pointed downstream. Caught in the reeds was a torn scrap of canvas. Clay waded in and pulled it free. Feed sackcloth. Stamped with black ink. B-bar supply. Briggs again. He carried it back to shore dripping creek water. Lily swallowed. He moved something here. Clay stared toward the timber beyond the bend. Or buried something. The horse behind him snorted and pulled once at the rope. Nervous. Ears pinned toward the trees. Clay's whole body tightened. He handed Lily the rope. Get behind the mule. She did not argue. He drew the rifle from the saddle's scabbard and stepped toward the timber. Slow. Listening. The creek ran cold over stones. Then, from somewhere inside the cottonwoods, came the crack of a boot on deadwood. Not animal. Not wind. A man. Clay lifted the rifle and fixed his eyes on the shadows. Because whatever Briggs had hidden near that creek, someone had come back to guard it. Clay Mercer held the rifle steady. The cottonwoods whispered over the creek. Nothing moved. Then a man burst from the brush and ran. Young. One of Briggs' hands. The same narrow-shouldered rider who had held back near the road. He scrambled through the trees with his hat gone and panic in every step. Clay did not fire. He ran. boots pounding damp ground, branches slapping his coat. The man reached the far bank, leapt for his horse, and missed the stirrup the first time. By the time he hauled himself into the saddle, Clay was close enough to see fear in his eyes. "Tell Briggs," Clay said, voice hard as fence iron, "I found the creek." The rider kicked away fast. Mud flying. Gone through the timber. Clay stood breathing hard, rifle in hand, heart beating like old trouble. Behind him Lily called from the crossing. "Clay." He turned at once. She stood beside the mule, one hand on the recovering horse's rope, the other pointing toward the reeds. Not the canvas this time. Something darker. Clay crossed back and pushed aside the tall grass with the rifle barrel. A box lay half buried in the mud. Long. Narrow. Wood swollen from water. He crouched and dragged it free. Heavy. Lily stepped closer. "What is it?" Clay pried the lid with his knife. Inside lay irons. Branding heads wrapped in burlap. 3 of them. He pulled one free and stared. Bellamy's circle/spur. Another bore a ranch mark from North County. The third had been hacked apart with a chisel. Destroyed. Clay's mouth flattened. Briggs had not only stolen stock. He had kept the brands. Proof. Tools of the Lige. Lily looked from the irons to Clay. "He hid them here." Clay nodded once. "And he sent that rider back to move them." He wrapped the brands again and shut the box. The horse beside Lily tossed its head, nervous at the scent of old smoke and iron. Clay took the rope. "We're leaving." They made for the ranch quick. No wandering path. No slow pace for the animal. The sky had turned the color of dirty wool by then. Clouds gathering low from the west. Rain coming. Or worse. Halfway home, Clay looked back once and saw 2 riders on the ridge behind them. Small. Distant. But following. He said nothing. Just urged the mule faster. Lily saw anyway. Her chin tightened. She rode straighter. By the time the ranch came into view, the wind had teeth in it. Clay got Lily and the horse into the barn first. Then he carried the wooden box into the cabin and shoved it beneath the loose floorboard under the table. Lily watched every move. "You think they'll come tonight?" It was not a question. Clay loaded the rifle. Checked the revolver. Fed one more shell into his coat pocket. "Yes." The word hung in the room like smoke. The first rain struck the roof 10 minutes later. Soft at first. Then harder. A steady drumming over the cabin and barn. The fire snapped bright in the stove. The small room glowed amber. Warm. Almost safe. Lily ladled stew into 2 bowls with hands that trembled only a little. Clay stood by the window instead of sitting. Watching the dark. Watching the rain. He finally crossed the room and took the bowl from her. "Eat," he said. "You too," she answered. They stood by the fire and ate without speaking. Outside, the storm thickened. Night came early. Black beyond the glass. Then the horse screamed. Not a whinny. Not a stamp. A full tearing cry from the barn. Clay dropped the bowl. It hit the floor and split. He was already at the door. Rain hit his face cold and hard the second he stepped outside. Lily was behind him before he could stop her. The barn doors stood open. One hanging crooked. Firelight flashed inside. Too bright. Too orange. Clay ran. Men burst from the shadows between the barn and corral. 2 of them. Scarves over their mouths. One swung a club. Clay ducked and drove his shoulder into the man's ribs. They went down in the mud. The club splashed away. The second man lunged for the stall. For the horse. Lily grabbed a shovel by the doorway and struck him across the back with both hands. Not strong. But enough. He staggered. Clay slammed his fist into the first man's jaw and came up fast. The barn interior burned in patches. Hay lit along one wall. Flames already climbing the boards. The recovering horse thrashed at the rope, eyes white with terror. The masked man by the stall yanked a knife. Clay drew the revolver and leveled it. "Drop it." The man hesitated 1 second too long. Lily hit him again with the shovel handle. He cursed, turned, and bolted through the far side of the barn into the rain. The first man scrambled up and followed. Gone into the dark before Clay could fire clean. He holstered the gun and ran to the stall. Smoke filled the rafters. The horse kicked wild. Clay cut the rope. Nearly lost the knife in his damaged hand. Lily dragged a wet blanket from the water barrel and slapped it over the burning hay. Clay pulled the horse toward the door. "Come on. Come on." The animal fought him once. Then followed. They stumbled out into the yard just as part of the south wall gave way behind them in a shower of sparks. Rain hissed against the flames. Steam rose thick and bitter. Clay shoved the horse toward the corral gate and turned back for the barn. Lily caught his sleeve. "Clay, no." He looked at her. Soot on her face. Rain in her hair. Fear shaking through her but not breaking her. He went anyway. 3 strides into the smoke to grab the tack hanging near the door. Saddle blanket. Bridle. Feed ledger from the peg. He came back coughing hard, eyes burning. By then neighbors were appearing through the rain. Old Tom Hanley first. Then the Dobbins boys from the next spread. Buckets. Shovels. Silent urgency. Together they beat the fire down before it took the whole place. But the south side of the barn was gone. Black ribs against the storm. Hay ruined. Tools charred. One stall collapsed inward. Clay stood in the mud with rain running down his face and watched the ruin breathe smoke into the night. Lily came to stand beside him, wrapped in a wet blanket, one hand still on the horse's neck. The animal shook but stayed upright. Alive. Barely. Tom Hanley stepped close, hat dripping. He looked at the wreck. Then at Clay. This weren't lightning. No. Tom's face hardened. Briggs? Clay looked toward the dark ridge beyond the ranch. No riders visible now. No lanterns. Just rain and blackland. But the answer was written plain in the fire. He had tried law. He had tried warning. Now he had sent men with torches and knives. Clay put one arm around Lily's shoulders without thinking. A small motion. Protective. Certain. And as the barn smoked behind them and the storm washed ash across the yard, Clay Mercer understood something cold and final. Walter Briggs had not come for a horse. He had come for anything Clay loved enough to defend. Morning came slow over the burned barn. Smoke still breathed from the blackened boards. Rain had washed most of the ash into the yard, leaving dark streaks across the mud like scars across skin. Clay Mercer stood beside the ruined wall with a hammer in his hand. Not working. Just holding it. The horse shifted inside the surviving stall. Alive. That alone had kept the night from turning worse. Neighbors had left before dawn. Buckets stacked by the pump. A few quiet words. No promises. No accusations. Men in the valley knew Walter Briggs' shadow reached farther than most folks like to admit. Now only Clay and Lily remained. Lily moves through the yard carrying wet boards from the rubble pile. Small arms. Steady work. She stacked them beside the fence without asking what could be saved. Clay watched that. Not pity. Not fear. Just work. The wind pushed low clouds across the sky. Cold again. Cold like the morning after the raid that took his brother. Clay set the hammer down. That memory had lived in his bones long enough. He walked into the barn. The horse lifted its head when he came. One ear torn. Rope burn healing along the shoulder. But the eyes had changed. Alert now. Alive in a way that matched the animal's stubborn heart. Clay ran a hand along its neck. "You don't quit easy," he muttered. Behind him, Lily swept ash from the stall floor with a short broom. The motion quiet, methodical. The way someone works when the world feels uncertain but the job still needs doing. Clay watched her for a moment. Then he turned toward the burned side of the barn. Half the wall gone. Roof sagging where the fire had eaten the beams. Fixable. Not today. But fixable. He stepped back into the yard and grabbed the axe. The first swing into a fallen beam cracked the morning open. Wood split. Another swing. Another. Lily paused her sweeping. Clay kept working. Not angry. Not wild. Just steady. Like a man building something new out of wreckage. By noon the broken boards had become a pile of cut salvage. Usable wood stacked beside the barn. Charred ends trimmed away. Lily brought water from the pump and set it beside him. He drank without speaking. Then handed the tin cup back. "Town knows," she said quietly. Clay nodded. "News travels fast when smoke's involved." "You think the sheriff will come?" Clay wiped his hands on his trousers. "Sheriff Pike works for Briggs when the sun's up." Lily's brow tightened. "Then who stops him?" Clay looked toward the ridge. Long. Quiet. The valley stretched wide beneath the clouds. Ranches scattered across it. Men who worked hard. Men who kept their heads down. Men who had probably lost cattle without ever knowing why. He finally spoke. "Truth does." Lily tilted her head slightly. Clay walked to the cabin. Lifted the loose floorboard under the table. Pulled out the wooden box. Inside the stolen branding irons lay wrapped in burlap. Proof. Heavy as iron always was. Lily stepped closer. "You're going to show them?" Clay nodded once. "Not just them." He wrapped the irons again and set the box on the table. The little brass Bellamy tag came out of his pocket next. He placed it beside the brands. Lily touched it carefully. Mr. Bellamy's sons still lived north of the river. Clay glanced at her. "You sure?" "My father traded there after the winter storm that took their cattle." Clay thought about that. Bellamy stock disappearing. Briggs land growing. Ranchers whispering but never speaking loud enough to matter. He looked back at the burned barn through the window. Then at Lily. "They tried to scare us off." Lily nodded. "They tried to kill the horse." Clay's jaw tightened. "And they burned the barn." Silence filled the room for a moment. The kind that comes before a decision. Clay reached for his saddle coat hanging by the door. Checked the revolver cylinder. Loaded fresh rounds. Lily watched every motion. "You're riding out?" "Yes." "To town?" Clay shook his head. "First to Bellamy land." The girl's eyes widened slightly. "That's a long ride." "Longer if we wait." Outside the horse stamped once in the stall. Stronger. Restless. Clay stepped to the barn and saddled his old roan. The leather creaked under practiced hands. Lily stood nearby holding the bridle. When he finished tightening the cinch, she spoke. "I'm coming." Clay stopped. "No." She lifted the brass tag. "This belongs to their herd." Her voice stayed calm. "But I'm the one who found it." Clay steadied her face. Mud still on her boots. Ash smudged across her sleeve. But her eyes steady. He had seen grown men look away quicker. The wind carried the smell of rain again. Storm building over the western hills? Clay swung into the saddle. Looked down at her. Then nodded toward the mule. "Stay close." Lily did not smile. But the air around them shifted. Not two survivors hiding from trouble anymore. Two witnesses riding toward it. They left the ranch as the clouds darkened. The burned barn shrinking behind them. The horse watching from the stall. Clay Mercer did not look back again. Because something inside him had finally changed. The man who once chose quiet and distance now rode toward a fight. Not for revenge. For truth. And for the small barefoot girl who had walked into his life with a dying horse and the courage to stay. The road to Bellamy Land ran wet and rutted under a low iron sky. Clay Mercer rode ahead. Lily Whitlock kept close beside him on the mule. The wooden box sat strapped behind Clay's saddle. Heavy. Certain. Like the choice he had finally made. By noon they reached the Bellamy spread. What had once been a proud ranch now sagged at the edges. Fence rails bowed. Corrals half empty. A windmill creaked slow above a dry trough. Two men stepped from the main house porch before Clay even reached the gate. Brothers. Same gray eyes. Same guarded look. Older now. Hard years carved into both. Elias Bellamy carried a shotgun low but ready. John Bellamy came down the steps with no weapon in sight. That made him no less dangerous. Clay swung down from the saddle. Said little. Just opened the box. The branding irons caught what little light the day offered. Bellamy's old mark lay on top. The circle. The slash. The spur. Elias Bellamy went still. John Bellamy stared like a man looking at a grave dug up by hand. "Where did you get that?" John asked. "At the creek on Briggs' land," Clay said. Then he set the brass tag beside it. Number 12. April 17th. For a moment nobody moved. Then Elias took one hard step forward. His jaw worked once. "That was my father's registry tag." Lily spoke next. Clear. Steady. The horse-hedger brand burned under Briggs' mark. Both Bellamy brothers looked at her then. Not dismissing. Not doubting. Just seeing the truth arrive in a small voice. Clay told the rest in short pieces. The covered brand. The hidden tag. The rider at the creek. The barn fire. The dead crow nailed to his door. By the time he finished, the wind felt sharper. John Bellamy looked toward the north pasture as though counting old losses all over again. He told the county winter sickness took 30 head, John said. Elias spat into the mud. I said then it smelled wrong. Clay nodded once. Now you can prove it. They rode for town an hour later. Not 2 riders now. 4. Then 6. Because the Bellamy brothers sent 2 hands to spread word through the valley. By the time Dry Creek came into view, wagons already lined the road. Men stood on the boardwalks. Women near the mercantile porch. News had run ahead of them. A land hearing had drawn the town to the square. So had smoke from Clay's burned barn. So had the possibility that Walter Briggs might finally be named out loud. The hearing sat under the awning beside the sheriff's office. A table. 3 county men. Papers weighed down with stones. Sheriff Pike stood near the rail with one hand hooked in his belt. Walter Briggs stood beside him in a dark coat, polished boots untouched by mud, as if the whole county belonged to him the same way a man claims air. His smile was ready when he saw Clay. Then he noticed the Bellamys. Then the box. The smile thinned. Well, Briggs said lightly. Mercer brought friends. Clay walked straight to the table. Set the wooden box down hard enough to make the ink bottle jump. The square went quiet. Lily slid from the mule and stood beside the rail. Small. Still. Watching everything. One of the county men frowned. This is a tax review, not a show. No, Clay said. It's theft. He opened the box. The irons lay exposed before everybody. A murmur rolled through the crowd. Not loud. But deep. Elias Bellamy stepped forward. That mark was stolen from my father's spread 5 years ago. John Bellamy held up the brass tag. Registry proof. Sheriff Pike moved fast then. Too fast. He reached for the box. Enough of this. Lily's voice cut through him. Don't touch it. Every head turned. She stepped to the front before anyone could stop her. Mud on her boots. Coat too big on her shoulders. Eyes fixed on the men at the table. "I found the second brand under Briggs' burn," she said. "I found the tag in the horse's mane. Clay found the irons hidden at the creek." Briggs laughed once. Forced. A child's tale. Then the change came. Not in Clay. In the crowd. Old Tom Hanley stepped off the boardwalk. "I saw Mercer's barn after men with torches ran from it." Mrs. Givens from the Mercantile lifted her chin. "I sold lamp oil to Briggs' rider that very afternoon." Another rancher spoke. Then another. A North County widow whose cattle vanished 2 winters back. A drover who remembered seeing Bellamy stock in Briggs' south pasture before the supposed winter die-off. The square shifted, piece by piece, toward truth. Briggs saw it. So did Pike. The sheriff's hand moved again. Not toward the box this time. Toward his revolver. Clay saw first. Of course he did. His own gun cleared leather in one smooth motion. Not theatrical. Not loud. Just sure. "Don't," Clay said. Pike froze. For 1 second all sound left the square. Even the wind. Then Elias Bellamy reached into the box and pulled free the hacked branding iron. The destroyed one. He held it high. Why destroy a ranch mark unless you feared what it proved? That landed harder than a bullet. One of the county men stood up. Looked at Pike. Looked at Briggs. Then at the crowd packed shoulder to shoulder around the awning. "This hearing is suspended," he said sharply. "It is now a criminal inquiry." Briggs turned then. Not to argue. To run. He shoved through the rail and lunged for his horse. Clay moved at once. So did John Bellamy. But it was Lily who saw what the others missed. The saddle strap. She shouted. One of Briggs' men had left it loose in his hurry. Briggs hit the stirrup, hauled himself up, and the saddle rolled under him. He crashed hard into the mud in front of the whole town. Gasps. Then silence. Then something sharper. Not laughter. Judgment. Public. Cold. Sheriff Pike backed away with both hands visible now, his courage straining in front of witnesses. The county men ordered deputies from the next district to take both of them. Briggs, face muddy and wild, shouted lies until the irons, the tag, and the witness statements buried him deeper than the fall had. Clay lowered his revolver last. Slow. Careful. His breathing steady again. Lily came to stand beside him at the rail. The Bellamy brothers flanked the other side. Not alone anymore. Not hidden anymore. Walter Briggs was led across the square with mud on his coat and fear on his face. And for the first time in years, Dry Creek watched power stripped bare in daylight, where everyone could see what it had always been. Spring finally took hold of the valley. Not all at once. Slow. Gentle. The last frost let go of the fence posts. Water ran clear in the creek instead of black with thawed mud. Grass pushed up through the pasture in thin green threads that thickened a little more each morning. Clay Mercer stood in the barn doorway with a new beam balanced on his shoulder. Sunlight warmed the back of his neck. The burned side of the barn no longer looked like a wound. Fresh boards stood where black ribs once showed. The roofline held straight again. Not perfect, but strong. He carried the beam inside and set it into place. John Bellamy, sleeves rolled up, drove one end home with 3 hard blows of a mallet. Old Tom Hanley measured the brace twice and grunted his approval. Men who once kept their distance had come with tools now. With lumber. With nails. With quiet respect. No speeches. Just work. That was the way of the valley. Clay tightened the beam with his good hand and leaned back to check the fit. Solid. Outside, Lily Whitlock crossed the yard with a basket of bread wrapped in cloth. No more borrowed boots now. A proper pair for Mrs. Givens in town. Still scuffed already. Still fast-moving. She set the basket on the porch table where coffee waited in a dented pot and smiled at the men without fuss. Then she turned toward the corral. Toward the horse. The animal had changed almost as much as the barn. Weight had come back to its sides. The coat shone chestnut in the sun where it had once looked dull and dead. The old fear still flickered sometimes in the eyes. But less now. Much less. Lily leaned on the fence rail and whistled once. The horse lifted its head. Then trotted toward her. Strong. Easy. Free in its movement. Clay watched from the barn doorway. Did not smile big. He never had. But something softer settled in his face. Tom Hanley noticed. Animal picked its people, Tom said. Clay drove the last peg into place. Looks that way. By late afternoon the work was done. The men washed up at the pump. Coffee became supper. Bread. Beans. Salt pork. Food tasted better outdoors after honest labor. The sun slid low and turned the whole yard gold. The kind of light that makes rough wood look almost gentle. John Bellamy sat back in his chair and wiped his mouth. "County men came by this morning," he said. Clay looked up. John nodded toward the pasture. "Briggs' land gets divided after the claims settle. Bellamy stock returns first. Then tax wrongs get corrected." Clay said nothing. But Lily, sitting on the porch step with her plate in her lap, looked at him. "What does that mean?" Old Tom answered before Clay could. "Means this ranch stays yours." Lily lowered her eyes for a second. Not to hide emotion. Just to hold it still. Clay reached over and took another piece of bread. That was all. But his hand paused near her shoulder on the way back. A brief touch. Light. Certain. Like a man relearning something he thought was gone for good. Later, after the men rode off and the yard grew quiet, the evening settled warm around the ranch. No riders on the ridge. No lanterns watching from the dark. Only crickets. Only the slow creak of leather from the corral. Clay sat on the porch step with a whetstone in one hand and a pocketknife in the other. The blade slid soft across the stone. Lily sat nearby mending a torn shirt in the last of the light. The cabin behind them glowed with firelight, though the air no longer needed much warming. Habit now. Home always looks better with a lamp lit. After a long while Lily held up the shirt and bit off the thread. "You never named him." Clay glanced toward the corral. The horse stood under the cottonwood, head low, tail flicking at flies. "No. You should." Clay considered that. The horse had come to him as trouble. As proof. As a thing left to die. But it had become something else. A reason. A turning. He looked at Lily. "You name him." She frowned a little. "Me?" Clay nodded. The girl looked toward the horse for a long moment. Then toward the rebuilt barn. Then toward the open cabin door where warm light spilled across the porch boards. "Chance," she said. Clay turned the word over once in his mind. Chance. Simple. True. He nodded. Fits. Lily smiled then. Not quick and small like before. A real one. It changed her whole face. Clay looked away toward the pasture, but not before she saw his own mouth pull into the beginning of something close to peace. The next morning dawn came clear and bright. A real spring dawn. No iron sky. No warning in the wind. Clay opened the corral and watched Chance step out into the pasture. The horse broke into a run at once. Across the grass. Through the new sunlight. Strong legs stretching. Mane lifting in the gold. At the far rise he stopped and turned back toward the ranch. Toward the barn rebuilt by neighbors. Toward the cabin with smoke rising soft from the chimney. Toward the man and girl standing side by side at the fence. For one long moment everything held there. The horse alive. The land his. The danger past. Lily slipped her hand into Clay's. Small hand. Warm. He looked down at it. Then covered it gently with his scarred left hand, the one that had lost fingers and once seemed made only for pain. Now it held something living. Something trusting. something that had stayed. Clay Mercer did not say much. He never would. But he stood there in the spring sun with Lily beside him and Chance running free before them, and the silence around him no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like a future. Earned. Warm. And finally his. If this story stirred a memory or two, saddle up with us again, hit subscribe and help keep these old frontier tales alive. Out here, every name, every trail, every sunset still matters. So till we meet again, friend, keep your hat tipped to the past, and your heart pointed west.